Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chan and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of the Disabled Tyrant's Beloved Pet Fish, Volume 4, also known as残疾暴君的掌心鱼宠by Xue Shan Fei Hu, and we will be covering 4 chapters today and we need to get right to it because we need to know why Prince Sting is coughing up blood and if this medicine that was just rewarded will be the cure for whatever's going on. So I hope you all enjoy. Chapter 121. This fish loves him so much. The Emperor was panicked too. Nothing could be allowed to happen to Prince Sting. He quickly ordered the guards to take Prince Sting back to his tent and summoned all the imperial physicians to examine him. Prince Sting had thrown up blood. Li Yu was even more frantic than the Emperor. From what he knew, only heavy injury or a serious illness could make someone throw up blood. Prince Sting didn't have any injuries, so was he sick? They'd been together the whole day, and he didn't even notice. What kind of incompetent consort was he? Li Yu felt remorseful and worried. When the guards came to take Prince Sting away, Li Yu jumped up and insisted on going with him. Even though he just vomited blood, Prince Sting was still clear-headed. And he held Li Yu's hand as he lay in the sedan, hoping it would calm him down. No matter what Prince Sting gestured, Li Yu agreed to it. But how could he possibly keep it together on the inside? If Prince Sting fell sick, his whole world would collapse. Then what was he to do? Some people, when overwhelmed with too much stress, would respond by settling into an extraordinary calm. This was happening to Li Yu right now. He still had the children. If Prince Sting was sick, Li Yu still had to support his family. He couldn't just wallow in misery. He had to think of the children and come up with ways to help Prince Sting. When they got back to their tent, Li Yu dried his eyes and went to check on the children, who were being taken care of by O.M.G. They were happy to see their fish dad, but Li Yu unfortunately had to let them know that Daddy Prince Sting was sick, so they had to behave and were going to be left in O.M.G's care again. O.M.G was beside himself with concern when he learned that Prince Sting was ill. But the consort was right. The young masters needed to be taken care of, and they couldn't let the prince worry while he was sick. O.M.G knelt down and begged Li Yu to take care of Prince Sting. Li Yu agreed. He went to stay beside him, watching Prince Sting unblinkingly. The imperial physicians came in waves, and each time they advised Li Yu to go rest. But Li Yu just sat there and ignored them unless he was asking about Prince Sting's condition. Tianchi, how do you feel? Li Yu cupped Prince Sting's cheek worriedly. Prince Sting smiled at him. It wasn't a big deal. After he'd spat up that blood, Prince Sting's complexion improved and his breathing steadied. Li Yu felt that Prince Sting was telling the truth, but the imperial physicians examined him again and again, and for some reason they wouldn't tell him what was wrong. The longer the examinations went on, the more anxious Li Yu felt. If the imperial physicians weren't saying anything, did that mean the illness was so severe that even the imperial physicians weren't sure if they could cure it? After some discussion among the physicians, an older imperial physician approached them. Your Highness, Prince Sting, I have some more questions for you. Please tell me the truth. Li Yu looked at Prince Sting, curious. If the imperial physician asked a difficult question, Prince Sting would have to write. Was he well enough to do that right now? Prince Sting was feeling better, so he nodded in response. Li Yu immediately went to the table to fetch a brush and paper. Your Highness, before you threw up, did you feel any discomfort? Asked the imperial physician. Prince Sting wrote, My qi and blood surged. My chest was in pain, and my throat burned. Have you ever had a similar incident, Your Highness? The imperial physician asked carefully. Prince Sting thought back carefully, then nodded and wrote, Yes, but I didn't vomit blood. Then, Your Highness, do you remember the first time it happened? Prince Sting hesitated, then wrote, Over a year ago. Over a year ago? Li Yu's eyes reddened. Why didn't you tell me? Prince Sting quickly wrote, You were sick with a cold, and I was unwell because I was anxious. It got better quickly, so I didn't think much of it. A cold? Li Yu was very healthy, and he rarely ever caught little colds or the like. He paused for a moment before he remembered that this had happened early on when Prince Ting proclaimed his love, back when Li Yu hadn't realized his own feelings yet and was fighting with Prince Ting. Back then, all he cared about was how unhappy he was, so he didn't notice Prince Ting's illness or discomfort. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Li Yu was so despondent that he almost started crying. Prince Ting quickly shook his head. "It had nothing to do with you. I didn't pay attention to it." While Prince Ting tried to comfort Li Yu, the older imperial physician discussed Prince Ting's answer with the other physicians present, then took his pulse again. As for the emperor, he shouldn't have come over personally to check on Prince Ting, but how long the imperial physicians were taking to come to a conclusion was making him worried, so he came to Prince Ting's tent himself. "What's wrong with Prince Ting?" he asked. After everything that had happened, the emperor had already decided on Prince Ting as his successor. He didn't want anything to happen to him. Since the emperor came to ask personally, the old imperial physician looked around and asked the emperor to step aside to speak privately. The emperor complied. The imperial physician knelt and said, "Your Majesty, after much examination, it seems that Prince Ting has been poisoned over a long period of time. As he just experienced a serious and stressful incident, this caused His Highness's chi and blood to surge, making him vomit out some of the poisonous blood in his body, which led to its discovery." Poisoned? Prince Ting was shocked, as were Li Yu and the emperor. How could he have been poisoned? Was it the six princes' doing? Li Yu felt like his heart was in his throat. "Imperial physician, what poison is it?" he asked hurriedly, ignoring the emperor. "Is it curable? What do you mean by over a long period of time?" Considering what Prince Ting said earlier, he had been poisoned for over a year? He vomited black blood because he was poisoned? The emperor didn't mind Li Yu's rudeness. "Answer quickly," he said. "I want to know as well." The imperial physician took a moment to organize his thoughts. "Your Majesty, please allow me to answer the last question first," he said respectfully. "We've concluded that the poison in His Highness's body has been there for decades, and it was only this year that the toxicity subsided a little, leading to his chi and blood surging and the poison's discovery." Decades? The emperor was shocked. Prince Ting was only in his 20s. How could he have been poisoned for decades? Judging by the look on Prince Ting's face, it was obvious that he was surprised as well. He didn't even know it himself. "Do you mean that Prince Ting has been poisoned ever since he was a baby?" The emperor recalled that Prince Ting was very weak when he was born. He had been examined by the imperial physicians several times by the time he was just a couple of months old. It improved when he grew up, but there had been no signs of poisoning. What's more, Prince Ting's pulse was taken regularly. If he'd really been poisoned for decades, why didn't they find out earlier? "Your Majesty, the poison isn't very strong," the physician explained, "and Prince Ting never showed signs of discomfort. It's very hard to detect just by his pulse." "Then does the poison pose any danger to his life?" asked the emperor. The older imperial physician hesitated and shook his head. "We only know that His Highness has been poisoned, but I have to take his pulse and reference the medical books before I can be certain of the particulars. However, since the poison has been in His Highness's body for a long time, he probably isn't in any immediate danger." The emperor was dismayed. He'd just decided to make Prince Ting his heir. Were the heavens playing a huge joke on him? Prince Ting was born mute, which was already devastating enough, but somehow the D prince had been poisoned right under his nose. Since it'd been for so long, it couldn't have been the sixth prince who did it. He was a few years younger than Prince Ting. Then who could it possibly be? Who else wanted to harm Prince Ting? The emperor felt both anger and guilt for not taking good care of his son. He also felt like he had let down the late Empress Xiaohui. "We must rid Prince Ting of the poison no matter what," the emperor ordered. The older imperial physician complied. The emperor turned around. Remembering the 4 children, he worriedly asked, "Will the poison be passed on to his children?" The imperial physician wasn't sure, so the emperor ordered Wang Xi to bring the children over. The elderly imperial physician took each of their pulses and discussed it with the other imperial physicians before coming to his conclusion. The Shutze and the 3 other young masters are not poisoned. Finally, some good news, the emperor thought. A silver lining at last. The emperor summoned Wang Xi to question him. Since Wang Xi had always been with Prince Ting, there must have been abnormalities when Prince Ting was first poisoned. Wang Xi would definitely know about something like that. Wang Xi thought long and hard, but in the end he swore on his life that Prince Ting had never shown any signs of being poisoned. The emperor was already a mess from the sudden announcement that Prince Ting had been poisoned, and decades ago at that. Though he found Wang Xi's answer suspicious, he had no other clues for now. Li Yu dazedly listened to the emperor's questions, and he finally understood what was going on. Prince Ting had been poisoned when he was young? But how come he didn't know? This was hardly insignificant, so why didn't the original novel mention it at all? He remembered that Prince Ting had stayed healthy until the end of the book. Did that mean that if Prince Ting hadn't vomited blood this time, they never would have found out that he was poisoned, and it would have stayed hidden? Then what was the point of this poison? Poison usually caused symptoms. Prince Ting really didn't seem like he was poisoned, and both in the original book and in this world, Prince Ting remained healthy his whole life, except Li Yu was in the middle of bringing ginseng soup to Prince Ting when his hands suddenly shook, and the silver spoon clattered as it fell to the ground. He bent over to pick it up, but his hand was trembling so much he almost couldn't hold it. Just now, he'd had a very terrifying thought. It was the emperor and imperial physician's guess that Prince Ting had been poisoned when he was young. But it was strange. Wang Xi, who was in charge of looking after Prince Ting since he was a child, had never noticed anything out of the ordinary. Li Yu believed Wang Xi, since there was no reason for him to lie. Could it be that the poisoning had taken place even earlier, before Wang Xi started working for Prince Ting? It was impossible for the poison to show no symptoms if it was buried so deeply in his body. Could it be that existing symptoms had been overlooked? That symptom would naturally be Prince Ting's biggest weakness, his muteness. Li Yu wasn't an imperial physician, but he knew from reading palace novels that there were poisons that could cause deafness and muteness. Was it possible that Prince Ting wasn't born mute, but that it was a result of the poison? Li Yu suddenly remembered a small incident from some time ago. Prince Ting didn't plan on having more children because he didn't want to pass on his muteness. But Li Yu really wanted to have a daughter, so he'd asked around about the emperor's and empress's ancestors to calculate what the odds were, but in the end, he found that none of them had been mute. That is, out of hundreds of people in over a dozen generations, man or woman, Prince Ting was the only one born mute. Genetically speaking, that was nearly impossible. But life was complicated. Li Yu had transmigrated at a very young age. He was hardly an expert on genetics. Anyway, it could have been simply a mistake on the part of the original novel's author. Now that he thought about it, many parts of the book that had seemed like plot holes or lazy writing to him when he'd read it had gradually been explained. For example, Prince Ting's name, Qianshi, was different from the other princes' names, but that was because he was originally named Qianjing and had changed his name. Then, was there possibly a logical reason for his super unlikely but somehow still existing muteness? Maybe Prince Ting was poisoned when he was very young, and it was misunderstood to be innate. Then, because of this, others never realized that he was poisoned? Of course, it was only a guess. If it was true, then that would be frightening. It would be best if Li Yu could find some evidence to either confirm or deny it. When Prince Ting was very young, before Wang Xi came, poisoned. A scene floated into Li Yu's mind. The newborn Prince Ting laying in his swaddle as he stared at his wet nurse, who was swallowing a packet of medicine with tears in her eyes. Holy shit! Li Yu was shocked at himself. Why did he suddenly think of that? This was the secret of Prince Ting's that he'd never really understood. The time period was right, and it was before Wang Xi's time, but the wet nurse was the one taking the medicine, not... No, that wasn't right. Li Yu recalled one of his conversations with the princess of Jinjue, who had mentioned that a wet nurse could pass medicine to a child through milk to cure the child of an illness. Then, if the wet nurse took poison, would the child... Li Yu felt like he'd been grasping wildly at straws, but suddenly grabbed the right one. Xiao Yu. Seeing him lost in thought, Prince Ting squeezed his fingers. Li Yu came back to his senses and resisted the urge to tell Prince Ting. He only had guesses and conjecture, so he couldn't impulsively tell Prince Ting. If the poisoning had nothing to do with his muteness, wouldn't he just be giving him false hope? The more important thing now was to help the imperial physician determine what the poison was. No matter what, I'll save you, he decided, gazing at Prince Ting. Sob. This fish loves him so much. I don't want to be a widow. Chapter 122. Fishy's Solution. It would take the elderly imperial physician a couple of days to determine exactly what poison Prince Ting was suffering from. Li Yu recalled that he'd just finished a side mission by helping Lady Liang, and the reward was an ancient medicinal prescription. The mission was completed when they'd confronted the Sixth Prince, so he should be able to collect the reward quickly. Li Yu didn't understand why the fish scamming system would reward him with an ancient medicinal prescription, but now that he thought about it, did it have to do with the poison in Prince Ting's body? He hoped it was the antidote, but he couldn't enter the system in front of the emperor and the imperial physician to retrieve it. If he did, he'd pass out, and that might cause a panic. Plus, because of Lady Liang, he and Prince Ting had been up all night, so the time limit for his transformation was quickly approaching. This had clearly also occurred to Prince Ting, since he kept staring at the silver hourglass, reminding Li Yu with his gaze. Li Yu smiled and lightly pinched Prince Ting's palm. He cleverly excused himself to the emperor, saying that he needed to change, and the emperor waved him away since he was busy talking to the imperial physician. Li Yu quietly slipped into the next tent. The tent was empty, and the countdown for his transformation time hadn't appeared yet. Li Yu entered the system first and collected the reward for Heart of Compassion. With the prescription in hand, Li Yu took a look at it, but as expected, he didn't understand it because he didn't know anything about medicine. Li Yu put it away. What's the prescription for? He asked the system. But just as expected, the fish scamming system didn't reply. There were imperial physicians outside, though, so Li Yu didn't need to insist on an answer from the system. All he had to do was ask them to take a look at it and tell him what it was used for. He had another goal for entering the system. Li Yu asked, probing, System, is there a secret behind Prince Ting's muteness? The system was aloof as always and didn't respond. But Li Yu had figured out a pattern from the system's non-answers. The system would only respond when the answer was definite. The original novel had spent a lot of time describing how Prince Ting couldn't speak since he was a child, that the emperor had given up on him early on because of it, and how the other princes had laughed and made fun of him for it. If his muteness was innate, and there wasn't any more to it, then it should be an obvious, definitive setting of the story. Why couldn't the system answer the question? Since the system didn't answer, it meant that there was another answer. Li Yu suddenly became spirited. Is Prince Ting's muteness innate? He asked bluntly. ... If the system was silent one more time, Li Yu was going to jump for joy. System, Li Yu asked, can Prince Ting's muteness be cured? ... Since it didn't say it couldn't, that must mean it could. I know the answer, even if you won't say. Li Yu happily blew a kiss at the system and left giddily. When he left the system, he heard the countdown. Li Yu was experienced with transforming, and since the transformation duration was now a whole day, he could almost immediately use his skill again when he turned back into a fish. He waited calmly. Time was up. In a flash, he turned into a silver koi with golden scales and even flicked his tail in midair. The next morning, he used his skill and once again became the delicate and dignified Prince Consort Yu. Since he'd said he needed to change when he left, he now switched his robes and returned to Prince Sing's tent. Royal Father, I remembered that there was an ancient medicinal prescription in a book I'd seen before. I'd like to ask the imperial physician to take a look at it and see if it will be of any help with Prince Sing's poison. Li Yu took out the prescription. The most important thing now was to cure the poison. Even if it was no use, he had to give it a try. The emperor knew that Li Yu was beside himself with worry. The elderly imperial physician hadn't figured out what poison it was yet, and the consort was already trying to offer up a prescription. However, the emperor was quite moved by his concern and gestured at the imperial physician to take a look. The imperial physician smiled. This is a prescription for strengthening and nourishing the body, but it won't cure the poison. Really? Li Yu was disappointed. Yes, the elderly imperial physician felt bad seeing Li Yu's dismay, but he continued. This prescription is used for strengthening the body, but if the poison is to be cured, we have to find out what kind of poison it is first. Li Yu nodded. The imperial physician made sense. They had to know what they were dealing with before anything else. Then how long until it can be determined? The elderly imperial physician stroked his beard, a little chagrined. Researching medical books took some luck, so he couldn't give an exact date. If he was lucky, it could take days or months, but if he was unlucky, it could take years. The imperial doctor had told them the truth. The emperor wasn't really satisfied, but he knew that this was just how things were sometimes. He planned on having the imperial physicians handle the diagnosis and treatment while he sent out an imperial notice calling for famous physicians from across the country. Perhaps a physician outside of the palace would know. When he heard the imperial physician's answer, Li Yu clenched his jaw. He had pretty much confirmed through the system that Prince Sing's muteness had to do with the poison. He suspected that Pu Liu had administered it back then, so he had to confirm that for everyone else somehow, no matter what. Summoning physicians was one thing, but Li Yu could take a shortcut through the system. The system had shown him the secret with Pu Liu in it. If she was the one who poisoned Prince Sing, then there might still be clues left in her former quarters. After the elderly imperial physician left the tent, Li Yu knelt and asked the emperor if he could take a look at the sealed room in Changchun Palace. As Pu Liu had made her mistake before Empress Xiaohui passed away from illness, the emperor was the one who'd ordered the room sealed. She'd left an impression on him, so he remembered her immediately, but he was surprised to hear Li Yu mention her name. "How do you know of Pu Liu?" he asked. Li Yu was ready for the question and recounted the incident where the children had destroyed the tiger cloth. He said that he felt Pu Liu's mistake was suspicious, but he had no evidence. "I believe that the imperial physician's diagnosis and treatment is one solution," he added. "But I might be able to help if I can find the poison or some other clue." The emperor's imagination didn't run as wild as Li Yu's did, so he didn't consider any connection to Prince Sing's muteness. But back then, when he was handling the matter with Pu Liu, Empress Xiaohui had already been unwell, so he'd been both anxious and furious. There were a lot of things that he didn't think through as carefully as he could have, and now that Li Yu mentioned it, he did think there was something suspicious about Pu Liu. As a wet nurse who had taken care of 2 other princes, it was very unusual for someone like her to make such a basic mistake. Li Yu was eager to help Prince Sing and wanted to confirm things with his own eyes, which made it hard for the emperor to refuse. "You can go ahead," he said after a moment of thought. "Since there are some suspicions around Pu Liu, I will ask head eunuch Luo to check where she is now. I exiled her from the palace, as I recall it, so we can probably still find her." Li Yu thanked him profusely. He knew that Pu Liu had gone back to her hometown, since head eunuch Luo had looked into her current whereabouts. Now they could use this information. But there was no need to tell the emperor about this. After asking Li Yu to take good care of Prince Sing, the emperor left. Prince Sing knew that Li Yu had investigated Pu Liu before, and now that he brought it up in front of the emperor, it definitely wasn't something he'd come up with on the spot. Do you think she's the one who poisoned me? Prince Sing asked. Li Yu couldn't tell Prince Sing what he'd seen in the system, so he wiped his face and said earnestly, Tianchi, I can't tell you yet, but I'll do my best to investigate and cure the poison. Prince Sing nodded. What the imperial physician said earlier had touched something deep inside of him as well. He was only in his 20s, accompanied by the love of his life and his children. He felt fulfilled and had never thought about what would happen after his death. But now, he'd suddenly discovered that he had been poisoned for decades. Even though the imperial physician promised to do his best to treat him, and Xiao Yu said he would look into it for him, Prince Sing had no choice but to plan for the worst. He was once again afraid that Xiao Yu would leave him after his tribulations were over. He never thought that he might leave Xiao Yu first instead. Even if he couldn't ascend to the throne, he was still satisfied with how far he'd gotten. He didn't have any regrets, but it was a pity that he wouldn't be able to grow old together with Xiao Yu. Xiao Yu was a carp spirit. If he died, the fish would simply move on with his life. No matter how much he despised that idea, there was nothing he could do. His short human life couldn't keep Xiao Yu forever, but he was satisfied that the carp spirit chose to spend his life with him. It was one thing to understand something with reason, but emotions were harder to accept. Prince Sting's knuckles turned white from his grip, and his painful yet passionate eyes were locked onto Li Yu, wanting to hold the memory of what he looked like before. Wang Xi would take good care of the children after he died. Prince Sting believed in Wang Xi, and he also believed in his children, who were growing day by day. The only thing he couldn't let go of was this fish. He wanted to protect Xiao Yu for as long as possible, and he hoped that the fish would remember him forever. Prince Sting quelled the pain in his heart and jingled his jade bell to summon his confidants. Then he patted Li Yu's hand and wrote on his palm, "They are all yours in the future, for you to use." At first, Li Yu thought Prince Sing was assigning him some helpers, but when guards who were usually hidden appeared too, Li Yu was shocked. What future was Prince Sing talking about? Was he taking care of things in preparation for his death? Li Yu felt like a knife had been stabbed into his chest, and the pain was unbearable. He squeezed out a smile that was even uglier than his crying face and did his best to distort Prince Sting's words. "That's good, actually. With the men you're lending me, I'll be able to find clues in just a couple of days. Don't forget that I'm a carp spirit. There's nothing I can't do. If I haven't given up, then you can't either." He turned around, furiously wiping away the small tear at the corner of his eyes as he boasted. He wasn't completely sure whether he could really cure the poison, but he had one thing to rely on. The system had said before that Prince Sting had the protagonist's halo, which meant he would definitely ascend to the throne. Even if he were poisoned, he wouldn't be in any life-threatening danger. It was much too soon for both of them to be arranging post-death matters. Prince Sting paused, realizing that this was Li Yu's declaration of love. He stopped thinking about it, held Li Yu's hand tightly, and nodded. Now that Prince Sting's poisoning had been uncovered, the emperor rushed them all back to the palace. Li Yu immediately hurried to Changchun Palace as planned, and even brought an accessory along, Prince Sting himself. There was no way around it. When his tyrant husband heard that Li Yu was going to the palace, he insisted on going with him no matter what. Though his men were already at Li Yu's disposal, the poisoned Prince Sing was being very overbearing and completely unreasonable, forcing himself into the already small group of people to make the trip. Li Yu couldn't talk him out of it, but fortunately, the elderly imperial physician said that since the poison had been with Prince Sing for such a long time, it probably wouldn't affect him if he continued as usual. Li Yu was still a little worried, though. He occasionally glanced at Prince Sing, who never left his side. Prince Sing gave Li Yu a glance. "No need to worry. You can start." Li Yu stopped hesitating and went straight to Puliu's room. He ordered the servants to remove the seal, and just like that, the room that had been sealed for decades finally saw the light of day. This room was said to have been preserved as it was, but since it hadn't been cleaned for such a long time, it was full of cobwebs. Li Yu felt a little apprehensive. The palace servants asked if they should clean it, but Li Yu refused the offer. If there were clues here, it would be better to leave things as they were. Li Yu took a dry rag to remove the cobwebs on his way, but Prince Ting stopped him, pushed him out of the door, took the rag, and did it himself. Stuck at the door, Li Yu wondered which of them exactly was the one who was poisoned. Prince Ting had always been like this, though. He didn't want Li Yu doing work. After the cobwebs had been mostly cleared, Li Yu was allowed to enter the room again and take a look around. The bed was no longer in a recognizable shape. The sewing basket was still on the table, and the chair was overturned on the floor. Tianchi, do you remember any of this? Li Yu tried to question Prince Ting, wanting to jog his memory, but Prince Ting shook his head. Li Yu had expected this answer. He put the chair back and sat where Puliu once had. After letting Prince Ting know he was about to meditate, he entered the system. If he remembered correctly, there were several secrets of Prince Ting's that he hadn't viewed yet. By his request, the system had allowed him to re-watch the secret to this room before, and now he could trade one of the secrets for another rewatch. He refused to believe there were no clues in this room. Li Yu didn't exchange all the secrets at once, instead starting carefully with just one. He once again entered the world of the secret, watching Puliu wait for someone, scuffle with the servant, and ingest the medicine. He didn't let a single detail escape him. He desperately wanted to be able to pause the memory, thoroughly examine the scene, and then have it continue again. This wasn't his first time reviewing this secret. He thought he'd seen everything there was to see the last time he viewed it, but he still discovered something new. Li Yu didn't have time to examine the new information as he discovered it, so he committed each part to memory and then exited the system to compare it to the real room. Right at the end, he'd seen Puliu swallow the medicinal powder. The piece of paper that was used to wrap the powder had slowly drifted to the floor under the table. The paper. Li Yu's heart jumped, and he stood up. Chapter 123. Fishy cures poison. Was the piece of paper that once contained the drug still in the room? Li Yu looked around at once, eager to find it, but all he found were dust bunnies. Li Yu realized that the memory hadn't necessarily taken place right before Puliu left. Though the emperor had sealed the room, it didn't mean that everything was still in the same place as it was in the memory. The paper that fell to the floor was most likely cleaned up before then. Li Yu gritted his teeth. He was a koi. He wished that he could have a koi's good luck for this. He calmed himself, sat down again, and compared the details he saw in the memory to those in reality. There weren't any useful clues so far. He spotted the sewing basket and started taking everything out, not hoping for much. Under a few scrap pieces of cloth, he found a cloth tiger. In the memory, Puliu had a half-sewn tiger, and the one here was mostly put together. It should be the same one. Li Yu assumed that the tiger cloth Puliu was working on had been torn by the children, but it seemed that she'd had more than one. It made sense. Children's toys broke easily, so they'd have several. Dabao and his brothers were the same. Li Yu held the cloth tiger in his hand, examining it. Then he rubbed it hard. As he rubbed it, he felt something scrape against his palm. The cloth tiger the children played with didn't have anything like that. Li Yu met Prince Sing's eyes. He took out a pair of scissors and carefully cut the cloth tiger open. The lining came first, which had Pu Liu embroidered on it, just like the one Li Yu had seen before. Then, after the cloth tiger was opened, the corner of a piece of paper poked out. Li Yu paused, then took out the paper. It was folded, and since it had been in the cloth tiger this whole time, it was practically untouched by dust. When Li Yu carefully pried the paper open, he found a small bit of powder still left in it, roughly the size of a pinky nail. Was this... Li Yu recalled the paper that the medicine had been wrapped in. The color was exactly the same. Tianchi! Li Yu shouted, excited. Prince Ting nodded and handed Li Yu a porcelain bottle. Li Yu folded the paper back up and put it inside. He wasn't sure what the powder was yet, but he hoped that it had to do with the poison. He needed to get it to the elderly imperial physician as soon as possible. Li Yu exited the room. There was a servant kneeling outside who eagerly asked if he needed any help. Li Yu had finally found some clues, so there was no way he'd let someone else help. He held onto the porcelain bottle himself and dragged Prince Ting to the Imperial Academy of Medicine. Imperial physicians could usually tell the composition of a medicine just from its dregs. If it was a powder, they could probably figure out what it was, right? Li Yu personally handed the bottle to the elderly physician who was treating Prince Ting. The imperial physician still didn't believe that this was the poison, but with Prince Ting and his consort both there, he had to thoroughly check it anyway. So he carefully sniffed the powder. Strange. The imperial physician couldn't believe it. After he received Li Yu and Prince Ting's permission, he tasted a small amount and immediately spat it out. He wiped his lips. Your Highness, consort, please give me a bit of time. Without even finishing his sentence, he excitedly ran off into the depths of the Academy of Medicine. Were they finally getting somewhere? Li Yu wasn't going to go anywhere, so he and Prince Ting sat in the academy, waiting. The longer it took the elderly imperial physician to return, the more anxious Li Yu grew. Prince Ting had steadied his emotions already, so he patted his head and to tell him not to worry. From his robes, he took out a small golden fish with a swollen belly, strung it together with 4 little fish, and gave it to Li Yu to fiddle with. When Prince Ting wanted to make him happy, he would always give Li Yu different golden fish. They were full of memories. Li Yu fiddled with it for a bit, feeling troubled. What if they couldn't find anything even after all this? Then he'd continue, even if he had to dig 3 feet into the ground. After the imperial physician left, there was no news at all until dusk, when the physician rushed back out with a thick medical book in his arms, missing both his shoe and sock on 1 foot. Imperial physician! Li Yu shouted at once. The imperial physician looked up to see Prince Ting and Li Yu and asked, surprised, Your Highness, consort, why are you still here? He'd completely forgotten that they were still waiting. Li Yu didn't mind. He looked at the medical book in the imperial physician's arms, hopefully. Did you find something? The elderly imperial physician smiled and nodded. It's all thanks to you two. I finally found something. Li Yu's eyes shone, and he had the imperial physician sit down and explain in detail. The imperial physician discovered that the powder Li Yu had given him was extremely similar to the prescription for nourishing the body, but with an extra ingredient. In traditional Chinese medicine, a slight change could result in a huge difference. With just a single extra ingredient, the intended effect might be completely different. So the imperial physician had rushed out to find out what the extra ingredient was. After extensive verification, he concluded that it was Xue. Li Yu and Prince Ting knew nothing about medicine. Xue is a type of tree that grows at the top of snowy mountains, the imperial physician explained. It blooms and bears fruit every 60 years, and the fruit is called Xue. It is amazing for the body, but hard to come by. Not many have appeared in this dynasty, and there aren't even any in the academy at the moment. I was lucky enough to see it when I was younger, and that's how I learned its medicinal properties. Li Yu was surprised. It's good for the body? So, it had nothing to do with the poison? The elderly imperial physician nodded. Yes, it's good for you, but there's a rule when using Xue. It cannot be taken with female ginseng. If those two are taken together, it becomes poisonous. I tasted both Xue and Angelica in the powder, which means this powder is indeed poisonous. The imperial physician had confirmed most of Li Yu's guesses. Li Yu curled his hands into fists anxiously. Then, is this the poison that His Highness is afflicted with? Li Yu told the imperial physician how he'd found the powder, as well as how Puliyu, the wet nurse, took the powder, and about his own suspicion that the poison had been transmitted to the newborn Prince Ting through her milk. The imperial physician's eyes brightened. That is definitely possible. I'll need to look into it further, but thanks to your help, consort, I'm no longer running around like a headless chicken. He stroked his beard happily. I should be able to confirm it within half a month. Li Yu finally saw a ray of hope, and he told the imperial physician that he would be waiting for good news. And although it hadn't been confirmed yet, he asked the imperial physician to keep it a secret. Prince Ting had been poisoned for such a long time, and as of right now, Li Yu had determined that the culprit was Pu Liu. But why would a small wet nurse want to harm the Empress's son? And the servant who argued with Pu Liu, from what Li Yu saw in the memory, it had seemed like she had taken the poison unwillingly. The servant's behavior proved that the poisoning was definitely not just Pu Liu's idea. Li Yu had looked for the servant as well, but he'd seemed quite ordinary, and Wang Xi said that servants like this were all over the palace. In comparison, Pu Liu was a wet nurse, so it felt more likely he'd make a breakthrough on the case by looking into her. That was why Li Yu focused all his efforts there. Now that he thought about it, though, Pu Liu had been kicked out of the palace. But what about that servant? Could it be that the forces that poisoned Prince Ting were still in the palace, unnoticed by the emperor? That was almost certain, but it had been over 20 years ago. The other party must be in a significant position of power by now. It could be someone that they didn't even expect. For the sake of caution, it would be best not to reveal their knowledge of any of this, in case the culprit wanted to harm Prince Ting again. After he left the imperial physician's hall, Li Yu headed straight for Qianqing Palace. The emperor was very happy that they'd found clues about Prince Ting's poison. Though the elderly imperial physician hadn't confirmed it yet, the emperor felt that the paper being found within the cloth tiger meant Pu Liu was definitely involved. Li Yu asked the emperor to keep it a secret too, and the emperor felt his caution was justified. "It's all thanks to you," the emperor said warmly. The emperor had given Li Yu the title of consort and treated him pleasantly, mainly because of Prince Ting and the children, but they'd interacted more during the hunting festival. The emperor had seen firsthand the affection between Prince Ting and Li Yu, as well as the effort Li Yu put into looking for clues. Now, though he didn't say so out loud, he trusted Li Yu completely. He thought Prince Ting was a great judge of character. The emperor agreed that the findings should be kept a secret. He was thinking a little further than Li Yu, actually. If Pu Liu had poisoned the newborn Prince Ting, then what had happened to the other two princes she'd raised, the eldest prince and the fourth prince? Some things were terrifying to consider. The eldest prince and the fourth prince's deaths were unbearably painful to the emperor, but he had to properly investigate them no matter what. If it really hadn't been an accident. The emperor stared at the brush next to his hand for a long, long time. No matter who the other party was, he would break them into a million pieces. He owed it to the late Empress Xiaohui. Meanwhile, after the elderly imperial physician gave him that half-a-month deadline, Li Yu went to probe the system by peppering it with questions. Did Prince Ting's poison have something to do with Xue Wuzi? Could Prince Ting's muteness be cured? Would he be able to speak again if his muteness was cured? ... The fish, who had always been scammed by the system, finally rose up and scammed the system back. The fish scamming system responded to every question with silence. It made the carp spirit feel very confident. "It's only half a month. There will be results after that," Li Yu reminded Prince Ting happily. Seeing Li Yu running around like this on his behalf to look for the poison, Prince Ting stopped worrying about whether he might leave him alone. Xiao Yu had saved him again. Prince Ting thought as he gazed at him warmly. He should keep the carp spirit by his side and repay him with everything he had. "Tianchi, if you could speak one day, what would you want to say?" His muteness was definitely related to the poison, but it hadn't been confirmed yet, so Li Yu couldn't tell Prince Ting outright. But it would be fine if he looked forward to it, right? Prince Ting had actually thought about this before. He smiled as he wrote, "I would want to say Royal Father and call out to the children. Most of all..." His brush stopped and he looked at Li Yu. "Most of all, I want to call your name," he wrote. Li Yu sniffed, emotional, and imagined it. If he could really hear Prince Ting say his name, he wouldn't even be afraid to turn into fish bones and fish ash. Half a month passed under Li Yu's excited watch. During this time, head eunuch Luo, who was looking for Pu Liu on the emperor's orders, sent a message that Pu Liu had passed away on the road back to her hometown. Her death further muddied the circumstances around Prince Ting's poisoning. Although that branch of their investigation had come to a halt, the elderly imperial physician gave them a satisfying answer to the other. He'd been looking into medical records for half a month and even tried the medicine on himself. He concluded that the poison Prince Ting was afflicted with was Xue mixed with female ginseng, as Li Yu expected. But Li Yu found it hard to come to terms with the physician's plan to cure it. The poisonous effects of Xue were hard to cure. The elderly imperial physician believed that the only way was to fight poison with poison, but it was extremely dangerous. The battle between two poisons would make Prince Ting very weak, and if he wasn't careful, he might fall victim to the second poison as well. The reason the elderly imperial physician dared mention such a plan was that there was an antidote for the second poison in the imperial physician's hall. Compared to Xue, this other poison was much easier to deal with. Li Yu hesitated, but Prince Ting had already nodded in agreement. Xiao Yu had tried his hardest to pave a pathway for him. How could he not walk down it? After Prince Ting took the second poison, he threw up increasing quantities of black blood. The elderly imperial physician said the poisons were fighting each other. Prince Ting tossed and turned in pain until his clothes were soaked with sweat. It wasn't until he stopped throwing up the black blood that the imperial physician let him take the antidote. Afterward, he fell into a deep sleep. Li Yu stayed next to the bed, distraught for him. The emperor came to visit several times and comforted the children, but perhaps because the other poison was too strong, Prince Ting didn't wake up after he'd been given the antidote. The emperor was almost beside himself with worry, and the elderly imperial physician couldn't figure out what was going on. Prince Ting's pulse was weak, but his heart was still beating. Li Yu was afraid that Prince Ting would drift into a coma, so he talked to Prince Ting every day and told him stories about the children. One day, Li Yu was telling him about how the emperor made the decision to send Dabao and the others to the imperial study room to be tutored by reputable teachers, but that the teacher didn't know what to do when faced with such cute, lively children. Dabao was extremely focused in class. As a 1-year-old, he could sit completely upright. After he started classes, he'd worked out his previous mistake with his Oa. Dabao and Sanbao had a great relationship, so great that they would take turns listening to the lecture and playing. The teacher wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry, and Sibao slept through the entire class. Who did he take after? Li Yu was speaking rather emotionally and had turned around to pour himself some water when a hoarse voice sounded nearby. Xiao Yu. He almost thought he was hearing things. The voice was so hoarse that it was almost grating, and the pronunciation wasn't quite right, but there was something familiar about the profound emotion in it. Li Yu turned around to meet Prince Ting's cold, pond-like eyes and dropped the teacup he was holding. Chapter 124. Fishy Teacher. Prince Ting would often call out Li Yu's name in his mind, but now that he'd actually made a sound, it seemed as if he couldn't quite believe it. He stayed frozen in place. Li Yu rushed over. "Teacher, you're awake!" he cried out with joy. "You can speak, right?" Even though he had already guessed as much a few days ago from the system's silent answers, a guess was still just a guess. The thought that Prince Ting would definitely recover kept him going the entire time, helping him stay hopeful even after Prince Ting was given the antidote and still didn't wake. And he really had heard Prince Ting's voice just now because Li Yu pinched his thigh hard. It really hurt. Prince Ting himself didn't know why this had happened. For the past couple of days, he hadn't been able to wake up, but he could hear. He heard everything Xiao Yu said to him. Every time Xiao Yu spoke to him, he could respond in his heart, but Xiao Yu had no way of knowing. In order to stop Xiao Yu from worrying, he tried his best to wake up, and when he finally opened his eyes, before he realized it, he'd already uttered Xiao Yu's name. The sudden, strange sound was hoarse and broken, like the tip of a sword dragged through gravel. It was unexpected to Prince Ting, too. This was him? How could he make sounds now? His throat was itchy and painful, The whole time he was asleep, it had felt like it was on fire. Prince Ting barely believed it. He froze and hesitantly said, "Xiao." He couldn't stop. The sound definitely came from his chest. It was him. Prince Ting was shocked. Li Yu was a little stunned, then belatedly hugged him. His eyes were full of tears, but he happily shouted, "Tianshi! Tianshi!" Prince Ting hugged him back firmly, wanting to say something else, but he was too weak. Once he realized that he could speak, he found that it wasn't easy to put what he was feeling into words. There were lots of words that he had heard before and could read, but he suddenly didn't know how to say them. He could only hug Xiao Yu, his chin placed affectionately on Xiao Yu's shoulder, and respond with a heavy, Li Yu was overjoyed that Prince Ting could speak. He told Wang Xi first, and Wang Xi's reaction was even more dramatic than Li Yu's. He fell to his knees, crawled over, and stared at Prince Ting. "Your Highness?" he asked, trembling. Prince Ting shut his eyes. Wang Xi. He knew who he was, of course, but he wasn't used to speaking yet. Just this one word was enough to make Wang Xi burst into tears, though. "Your Highness, you're favored by the heavens. I have no regrets in this life anymore," Wang Xi exclaimed, smiling and crying. The elderly imperial physician was hurriedly summoned to Prince Ting's manor. After he heard Prince Ting stutter a bit, he was shocked. He took Prince Ting's pulse and announced that it was an unexpected surprise. "The poison has been cured now, but I didn't expect that the muteness would also..." Everyone had always said Prince Ting's muteness was innate. The possibility had never occurred to the physician, but his muteness had disappeared with the poison, which meant that it was the result of the poison, not congenital. This imperial physician had been in the palace for decades now. He knew Prince Ting had been silent since birth, but if it was the result of poison, then he must have been poisoned shortly after he was born. There were only a few people who could have done it, but the elderly imperial physician was only in charge of curing Prince Ting of the poison. With the poison now gone, as well as his muteness, the imperial physician barely even had time to celebrate, so he didn't give the implications too much thought. Li Yu had thought of something. He threw the imperial physician a look. "Imperial physician, since His Highness is cured from the poison and can speak now, does that mean he won't pass the muteness or the poison to his descendants?" The imperial physician didn't quite understand what he was implying, but he answered just the same. "Since His Highness's muteness was caused by the poison, and the poison is now cured, the children will not inherit it. Please rest assured, Your Highness, consort." Li Yu's smile nearly split his face in half, and he batted his eyelashes at Prince Ting. Prince Ting's heart trembled. He understood what Xiao Yu wanted. Since his muteness was... Sorry. He understood what Xiao Yu wanted. Since his muteness was cured, there was no need for contraception in the future. Prince Ting slightly nodded. "All right, you have my word." Just like Xiao Yu, he wanted a daughter too. With the prince and his consort exchanging loving glances, the imperial physician felt like the air had gotten warmer somehow. He cleared his throat. "Though the poison is now gone, His Highness is still weak and should continue taking medicine for a while," he said. "The strengthening prescription the consort had is quite good for that. I will add some throat-soothing medicine as well, and I hope Your Highness recovers quickly." The elderly imperial physician was so happy that he couldn't stop himself rambling on, eager to explain the medical reasoning behind everything. Li Yu and Prince Ting just stared into each other's eyes, gripping each other's hands tightly. Their hearts were overwhelmed with joy. They almost couldn't hear anything else. Wang Xi brought the imperial physician to the palace to report to the emperor. When the emperor heard the news, he rushed over to Prince Ting's manor, where Prince Ting, supported by Li Yu, knelt and tried to call him royal father. The emperor's feelings were extremely complicated. He felt happiness at regaining what he'd lost, but he was furious that he had been deceived by a traitor. It wasn't appropriate for the emperor to say too much, so he told Prince Ting to stand and patted him on the shoulder. All of his emotions were let out in a long sigh as he said, "Tianshi, get well soon. There are still a lot of matters for you to attend to." He stared at Prince Ting for a long time with tears in his eyes. Prince Ting had only just regained his ability to speak, and so he could only say a few words. But the emperor was very satisfied. But they couldn't tell the outside world that Prince Ting could speak again. If they found out that his muteness had been fake, then what was real? Puliu was reported dead, but there was no evidence yet, and the midwife who delivered Prince Ting and the imperial physician who diagnosed him back then still needed to be investigated too. It was true that the emperor hadn't heard Prince Ting's cries when he was born, so there had to be something more to it. The belated realization that Prince Ting wasn't born mute was like a sharp rock, shattering the decade-long peace within the harem. Luo Zheishang and the Imperial Guards were currently investigating the cause of Puliu's death. Until the truth was revealed, the emperor needed Prince Ting to pretend to still be mute so as to not alert the enemies. Prince Ting and Li Yu could roughly guess what the emperor's plans were, and they agreed. The children had been attending classes at the palace recently. When the emperor received the news that Prince Ting had been cured of poison, he'd brought the children with him to visit. Li Yu had only told them that Daddy Prince Ting was feeling unwell and couldn't see them for a bit. The children didn't quite understand, but they were sad for several days because they couldn't see their daddy. The emperor had ordered them to study in the imperial study room partly because the children were smart, but also because he wanted to distract them. Now that they heard Daddy Prince Ting was getting better, already healed, the children were overjoyed. They ran into the room one by one and grabbed onto Prince Ting's trousers. Prince Ting smiled and hugged each of them, bringing them all to his lap. Li Yu was worried that he was too weak for this, but Prince Ting shook his head at him. He'd missed the children while he was unconscious. The children hadn't been hugged in a while, and all their eyes were rimmed red. "Subao, miss Dad!" Subao lay on his dad's chest, softly expressing how much he missed Daddy Prince Ting. Prince Ting patted the top of his head. He couldn't pronounce the S from Subao, so he could only say, "Bao, Dad missed." Dabao, Arbao, and Sanbao perked up their ears. Daddy Prince Ting suddenly spoke. The fish children were used to Prince Ting's muteness. They didn't know what a disability was, and back when they were very young, Li Yu had kindly explained to them that Daddy Prince Ting couldn't speak because he was sick. Fish Dad didn't want the children to think of Prince Ting as different. He did his best to make the children believe that he and Prince Ting were the same. Unexpectedly, the fib became the truth. Prince Ting was sick, so naturally, there'd come a time when he was cured. "Daddy's all better now," Dabao suddenly realized. Before the children could jump up, Li Yu hurriedly told them that Daddy Prince Ting wasn't completely healed yet, so they couldn't tell anyone else. This was a secret between the children and their fathers. Li Yu stuck out a pinky, asking them to keep it a secret. Dabao, Arbao, Sanbao, and Subao loved keeping secrets for Fish Daddy. They fought to be the first one to complete the pinky promise. Subao even especially linked pinkies with Prince Ting. "Daddy, Subao, same." Subao had made a new discovery. He smiled as he pointed at Prince Ting, then himself. Among the children, Subao wasn't great at speaking. Prince Ting also wasn't great at speaking, since he was recovering. They were on the same level. Little Subao was now a fish who'd gone to school. He knew what a teacher was. Hurriedly, he offered, "Subao, teach Daddy." Prince Ting smiled and was about to agree when Li Yu picked Subao up. Let go of Daddy Prince Ting and let me do it. Li Yu pursed his lips at Prince Ting, then smiled widely at Subao. Subao was suddenly frightened by his fish daddy's smile. He felt a bit confused. He hadn't even done anything yet, and Fish Dad had already eliminated him? Li Yu really meant it when he said he would teach Prince Ting. It would be easy, since he'd taught the children how to speak already. Teacher Yu was quick to prepare his lesson. He held a peach blossom pastry and smiled. "Tianchi, you can only eat if you get it right." Prince Ting smiled back slightly and nodded. Was Li Yu trying to start his education? But it wasn't bad to have a reward. There was no way Li Yu could start by teaching Prince Ting to say, "Dad." Prince Sing was a little out of practice. He could read, but it came out a little different when he tried to say it. It was because he didn't have any real experience with reading out loud. Li Yu decided to start by teaching him pinyin, since that was how they taught it back where he came from. Yu Laoshi quickly filled the paper up with writing. Tianshi, do you know Vol.4 de te ne le? Prince Sing didn't know it, so he smiled and asked for help. Xiao Yu. His hoarse voice was still quite unpleasant, and the elderly imperial physician said it would be like that for a while. But every time he said Li Yu's name, it sounded magical, stirring the fish's heartstrings and making his scalp go numb. Teacher Yu almost got distracted and tapped sharply on the blackboard, blushing. No interrupting. Read it with me. Prince Sing, the student, filled up with a bunch of knowledge on consonants and vowels. He was the first person in ancient times to learn about pinyin, but he didn't find it too difficult. Since he listened carefully to Li Yu and picked things up easily, he soon realized that Xiao Yu seemed to be teaching him some form of basics. After he got the hang of the vowels and consonants, Xiao Yu wrote out the most commonly used pinyin and taught him how to string it together. Prince Sing stumbled a bit, trying to combine it all, and would occasionally make mistakes, but Li Yu told him to take his time. Prince Sing slowly learned how to first say a word, then a phrase, and then people's names. Perhaps it was fate. Xiao Yu's name was the first one he called, and the only one he never got wrong. To help Prince Sing improve faster, Li Yu gave him the task of reading out loud. That usually happened in the morning, as Li Yu believed that the morning was when one had the most energy and was in the best state for learning, perfect for reading practice. Morning reading was a daily occurrence. Teacher Yu had student Prince Sing start with the simple, man at birth is fundamentally good in nature, and work his way up to storybooks from there. He would often give personal demonstrations and surprise checks. Tianshi, how is this pronounced? Teacher Li Yu flipped to a certain page of a certain storybook, pointed to a certain line, and pretended to casually listen for his answer. Student Prince Sing glanced at him and read emotionlessly. Husband. His cold face and voice tickled Li Yu's heart. What about this one? Partner. He pronounced both words flawlessly. Li Yu was over the moon, thinking that he was sneakily taking advantage of his student. In reality, Prince Sing knew exactly how many times he'd read those words, and he was absolutely going to make Li Yu pay for it in a different way in the future. Li Yu treated his prince student and his fish students differently. He was stricter with Prince Sing. The children would get a peach blossom pastry even if they just blew a bubble. But he would only give Prince Sing a peach blossom pastry if he was in a good mood, even if Prince Sing's mouth was dry from reading all day. But Prince Sing didn't complain. He smiled and ate the peach blossom pastry from Li Yu's hand. One of Yu Laoshi's fingers would always inevitably end up in Prince Sing's mouth. Teacher Yu couldn't bear it anymore, and there was no need for him to bear it anymore either. It's okay to take a break from learning how to speak once in a while, Teacher Yu said shyly. Why don't we first suck? Have a daughter. He was definitely about to say suck essence. That's so nice. Okay, you guys, I hope you all enjoyed these chapters. I mean, come on. I said before the series ended, the man was going to talk. He just had to. Although it is quite sucky to hear that no, the powder that the wet nurse was taking was not something to help him, but something to harm him. So that's kind of womp womp. I can't wait to see who's truly behind this entire plot. It'll be interesting. And at this current, I just don't have any guesses at all, period. But I love that Li Yu was so vigilant in these chapters and was like, no, we need to find the cure. We need to find the cause, find the cure to help my baby. Okay. So I don't really have anything else to say. I'm going to give you a Mandarin lesson. Yay! One of those again. But before I do that, let's see. On page 115, when it was talking about Prince Ting receiving his lesson, actually, it said that Teacher Yu had student Prince Ting start with the simple man at birth is fundamentally good in nature. So for those of you who aren't reading from the book, there is a footnote that says the first line of the 3-character classics, a piece of classic Chinese literature often used to teach children. So that's where that phrase comes from. Now, let's get to the Mandarin lesson. I'm going to share with you every word that I know. There was really only one that I was unfamiliar with, and that was for partner. So anyway, one of the things it said is that he started with teaching him pinyin. So for those of you who are unaware, pinyin is basically Roman letters. And these Roman letters, or our alphabet, if you will, are used to help people learn Mandarin. Honestly, even people in China learn using this method. You kind of have to. But anyway, let's get to some of these words. Oh, no, before we do that, the part that I thought was really nice is when he asked, hey, do you know what Vol.4 and Do are? So again, going back to pinyin, basically just think of that as phonics. You know, how we learned A, B, B, C, D, D. That's Vol.4. It's teaching less about the vowel that was following, but how to pronounce the consonant. Consonants. However, you can learn how to pronounce vowels with certain consonants because, of course, like I said in my Mandarin video, certain vowels will be pronounced a certain way depending on what consonant they're with. Like I, when it's for sibao, S-I, s, or number 4, s, or die, s. But if you put it with like sh, it becomes so sh for okay or yes. So anyway, that's cool. And now I think there were 2 words. So the first one is yu lao shi. Lao shi is teacher. So lao, that's the 3rd tone, and shi, you can just say that like a 1st tone or just barely touch it. Lao shi. Okay. And then the other one was husband, and that's lao gong. So there's lao again. It is the same character too. So teacher, lao shi, and husband, lao gong. Alrighty, I think those were all of the words, really. Yeah. Oh, just in case, because it's been a long time, I may have done that in like the first video or so. There is xiao yu, which he said, he never got wrong. So xiao yu is little fish. Xiao yu, so 3rd tone, 2nd tone. And now I believe that's officially it. So please let me know your thoughts in the comment section and let me know how happy you guys are that Prince Ting can finally speak. Okay, I'll see you guys next time. 我爱你们